Hello, my name is Jake Stevenson. This is a video that kind of acts as like a landmark from my philosophical progress as I turn 18. So, what's the ordeal here? I'm not trying to crystallize philosophers, but I like Deleuze's approach, where I provide an openly subjective interpretation of philosophers with my own conclusions. This is meant to be kind of a threading of certain ideas that a lot of philosophers put out, not something that's meant to be taken as gospel for any of the views of the philosophers I will mention. Obviously, I am still very much in development as someone who reads philosophy, but that's also just not what I'm trying to do. All of these are innately threaded with my political beliefs, but this is not meant to be a voucher or a statement about them in itself. So all of these create a backbone of where I create my philosophical opinions, but they aren't the contents of them in itself. That's something based off of material inquiry, which is not found here. So finally, my goal is really mostly just to express my viewpoints, so in 4 years down the line I can be like, oh wow, look at that, my brain works differently now. So to kind of give a quick overview of where my philosophical inquiry has led me, I've been reading philosophy for 1.5 years, almost 2, and I started with mostly Camus, Nietzsche, Confucius. And to start, I usually applied philosophy internally. I would read it, I would look at myself, and I would say, how should I act differently so that I can be in line with these people who are smarter than me? And I don't like this way of doing it because we're all, given people that are in ordinance with their psychology. I'm not going to obviously change myself, and the only way of really doing that is going through raw experiences. So while I agree with some of the ideas of these guys, the way of which I implemented them at the time of which I was reading them was heavily flawed. And what mostly changed this was moving on to mostly Baudrillard, Plato, and Aristotle, because all of them kind of grounded me in the importance of my external circumstances, just through the kind of focus on authenticity with Plato and Aristotle, with their kind of search for innate value and what kind of guides the guiding line of the real that connects all of us, essentially. And by that, again, I just mean Plato's world of forms was existent to provide a line of which all of our linguistic capacity lies on, so that was an inquiry in trying to find the real in a way. And then Baudrillard in that, it's, somewhat sociological, somewhat philosophical, but it still defines the external world in the way that the individual changes because of that. And so he's today's my favorite out of all of these, I would say, but changed my view, look at things externally. And then later on, I started reading Spinoza a bit, who I like for certain smaller ideas, and then way more recently Marx. But again, Marxist views lie less in Marx himself and more in my political material lookings and so on, and that's not going to be here along with Baudrillard. Both of those are, for a different thing. So to start out, the one awesome thing about my eyesight declining is that now I feel like I have a genuine sensory feeling of nothing. And what I mean by that is that when someone comes across it as who has, fair eyesight, it's like, what is it like to look when you don't have your glasses on? And you can kind of explain it as fuzzy, you can explain it as blurry, but it's a lot more accurate, I feel like, just to say that it is literally nothing at all. That it is absolutely nothing whatsoever. That sensory ceases to be. And so this was a gift in itself because I can apply it to death. I can internalize now that death is simply nothingness. That is it. It's over. Sensory ceases to be. It is what it is. And so this is more of my subjective, little viewing of it, but I feel like a lot of people see philosophy in this existential mystique, where you're gonna you go into philosophy and you feel like you're gonna pick up a rock that just instantly makes everything make sense. But no, that's not really at all what it was, and I feel like how it should be with it. It's a lot more like just coping with the fact that our external reality wasn't baked for us to understand. And so in this way, I feel like absurdism is a fair take because it's essentially just a coping mechanism. And again, it has to be applied right, but I like the idea that Camus presents that, again, the universe's laws wasn't made for us to make sense of it, and it would be wise to suspend certain reasoning of things and calling it absurd so that it doesn't kind of burden us. And so in this way, I affirm death as absurd, or I affirm it as nothingness, which is typically the pessimistic outlook, characterized whatever. And I kind of accept the fact that, alright, there's nothingness, I move on. It's absurd. I can't reason with it. There's no point. It's absolute anyways. And that's it. And to further kind of articulate how I feel, this painting here. It displays, I think, the kind of result of philosophical inquiry, which is, you're like, all right, I'm going to uncover a rock with answers, but it turns out that all that there is really there is what is right in front of you. And so philosophy isn't about uncovering something new, it's about uncovering what's there and then dealing with it. So what now? I think a lot of areas of study reach the same ends as what philosophy used to do, and so I think it's time to give psychology and sociology the microphone. Pretty simple. And again, I'll get into how Spinoza ties into this in a little bit, but if I want to figure out morality, instead of researching morality from Aristotle, it would be a little bit more wise to figure out how our brains actually work, so I can become a lot more cognizant of how humanity actually works, and so I can pursue happiness in line with how my actual psychological function works. And so what is some of this psychological function? So again, my referent is this book on loneliness to the left here, but essentially natural selection hard-coded us to be social. Simple as the groups who were able to work together and cooperate more and effectively socialize were the ones that survived, therefore our brain oriented itself with the faculties to socialize. And secondly, due to our physiology, because when babies are born, they're half-baked, which is a little different compared to other species. Parents have to take care of them a lot longer. So because of this, natural selection again prioritized the beings who could see ourselves in a larger context so that we would incentivize essentially taking care of our kids. And so this has given us the capacity to see ourselves in a far larger human whole, to see time as a real thing, and so on. And so I think it's important to orient our opinions and our more, again, maybe you can call it existential, but just being grounded in humanity in this way. And so again, things take a Spinoza quality, because Spinoza believed that good were things that simply promoted survivability and negative things were things that did not promote survivability. And so in this way you can implement psychology into that. So positive things are what give more people a just psychological result. Again, complicates itself from there, but very simple premise of it. And further with Spinoza, he believed that it was through our natural experience in the world and traveling it that we learned. And so in this way, it affirms the psychological perspective that is dominant today, that it's mostly nurture layered atop nature, and this kind of like flux between the two that actually create us rather than just one or the other. And one instance that shows it was the experiment that occurred with the triplets that are in the bottom right, where very immoral experiment, but it split them as they were getting adopted into homes with different socioeconomic statuses, with different parenting styles. And while they still had the same looks, same mannerisms, some of the same tastes, it was ultimately each of them dealt with very different perspectives and cognitions down the line. And so again, it's not nature or nurture, but the way we are nurtured affects our nature, and our nature is set to cope with it in a certain way, but it's just not one or the other. And so to kind of wrap this idea, these psychological ideas, and before, and maybe a philosophical end, meaning in itself is value and meaning amongst each other. What I mean by this is that there's no such thing as reality without anyone to actually call something a reality. Obviously, these words and patterns only find their home in our brains, because ultimately everything is perception. But there's no point of declaring something a reality if there's no one to articulate it to. And so what I mean by that is that those around us are the fabric of value itself. So if I'm to do something, if I'm to make a chair, it's cool to make a chair for myself and maybe promote survivability, building this chair for myself, but building chairs for others is a lot more fulfilling because it kind of continues on our species and the survivability of our species and reverberates value in a far more real sense. And so what I go further with this is that I affirm, in a sense, Camus' sentiment that the best life was not the happiest life, but the fullest life. But what the fullest life consists of is raw experiences that attest to meaningful social connection. And this is further backed by psychology too, because the elements of which contribute to the feeling of loneliness, which is like a hard-baked actual phenomenon that we have with actual physical and mental repercussions, is not just through it doesn't occur because we lack objective social support. It occurs because we lack meaningful social connection. So we need to actually connect some sort of meaning through ourselves to others and have the others around us to not feel lonely. And of course, if you're an introvert, if you're an extrovert, it works in different ways. It's complicated, but in the end, all of us do need meaningful social connection to different extents, but that value still remains there. So I think the fullest life is implementing yourself within that. And again, to go further, because it's based on others, and ultimately that leads to the collective, and the fact that in our cerebellum and what I mentioned with our physiology, we have the capacity to see ourselves in the larger context of humanity, because again, that's what we needed to make sure we kept children alive. It's important that we still affirm it as a beautiful thing to be a part of humanity. There's again, we're just atoms and a lot of chemical reactions, but the fact that we so happen to be the chemical reactions that are a human rather than that of like bacteria or a bug or a chicken is really awesome. And even if things kind of suck, it's still important to take value in the fact that we are like extremely robust creatures with an extreme capacity for doing really awesome things. And so, I mean, despite the chaos, we still need to find beauty in our little contemporary settings where, even if it's small, and I think there's like an illusion of grandeur because everything is so big today with like the media and like the large scale of politics and so on, we need to just take value in the small connections we make with each other. And the fact that it's valuable that I can just walk amongst other people, give them a slice of my brain, they give them a slice of theirs. To just be a part of that is what is actually great. And so this kind of leads me to say what is really human rights all about. And so I don't see it as this concrete law that people will set out. Like, people will be like, freedom of speech is human right, or food and water is human right. I don't think it's as simple as giving a law for everyone and then this is just a human right. The law can be, and a lot of the times it is, but ultimately what human rights is the aptitude of which a society can fit our nature and promote positive nurture. And again, I mean positive nature, not just nature, because it's all just nature in the end, but it needs to cultivate the great aspects of our nature that give us fulfillment and minimizes our wrongdoing towards others, so that, you know, the more people can just feel fulfilled psychologically. And so the laws, of course, of human rights that we declare sometimes can be in ordinance with this, but I think it's a lot more of a flux and a lot more of a broad inquiry into dictating how much is a society in ordinance with human rights. And so the reason then I have Marx and Nietzsche lined up in each other is because while it's very true we all have our own capacities and we're all different to some extent, in the end we all have the same brain for the most part. Again, obviously, mental illnesses, neurodivergence, so on. Obviously there's some differences, but what I mean still though is that we're all based off the same genome. And it's important to affirm that, and that the collective's health is very important for the individual, because neither of them exist in a vacuum. You can't have a society that just goes guns ablaze, like you can do whatever the flip you want, live to your truest potential, because you will never live to your truest potential if there is not a community for you to get you there. But at the same time, you can't just go like crazy, like hyper collective, everyone the same, so on, because then people won't be able to find their own innate aptitudes if they're on this like set rail. And so it's kind of a balance between the two, where you need to make a society that is a very strong collective but that still promotes the individual's own ways of being in that collective. And so I think the innate way of a human right, or a frequency, not frequency, but amplitude of which something reaches human rights, is its ability to reach that idea here of the nurture nature for the individual's aptitude in the collective. Ultimately, to conclude, dying is okay, coping is the way. I think, and again, this is a-religious because I am a-religious, and this is just hard-grained into my beliefs and so on, which is probably could have already been a guessed, but it's better just to accept the fact that there's nothing after death and then find a way to get meaning after that, rather than just stumble on the question of like, am I really just going to be nothing? Because ultimately you're going to get nowhere. There's been 108 billion of us. No one's going to be the one to solve it this time. So it's much better just to kind of cope and figure out a new way of distilling meaning despite the circumstances. And I affirm material study as kind of superior in a way to certain philosophical inquiry, but that's kind of how philosophy works. It's just it puts out a question, and then you try to answer the question. It's like, oh wait, now there's like a new study here. It took philosophy to make all of the subjects we have today. It took philosophy to make math. It took philosophy to make history, because someone had to philosophically say, oh wait, history shouldn't be some kind of like fictive story, it should be like objective reporting. And so it's now today, like philosophical inquiries of like morality and the group can be supplemented a lot by actual sociology and psychology. And then of course study goes further, just science, history, all of it is kind of contained in our collective, and all of it is important. So, finally, meaning is declared by the self, but it needs affirmation of others. And so this has to do, again, with what I believe is human rights, what I believe is our nature, and what leads to a good life, is that you must find meaning, but you also must find that meaning amongst other people. You must find a way to contribute to humanity as a whole in your own way, and that's what will actually give you a fulfilling life. So, yep, that's about it. Thank you for watching.